Hello and welcome. India's Prime Minister may be celebrating victory in a critical vote of confidence, but there's no guarantee he'll get the nuclear deal he's after with America. On Tuesday, Manmohan Singh was struggling to keep his coalition party in power after a two-day acrimonious debate with opposing parties, as well as allegations of cash bribes to sway the vote. As it happens, the United Progressive Alliance, or UPA, which is led by his Congress party, survived that confidence vote with a comfortable margin. Almost forgotten in the chaos was the India-US nuclear deal at stake if the current Indian government was forced from office. Under the accord, India, which has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, would gain access to US civilian nuclear technology and fuel. In return, India's civilian nuclear facilities would be opened to inspection. Well, in spite of the parliamentary victory, Dr. Singh is up against the clock. It's still unclear whether there is enough time for the deal to be passed by the US Congress before President Bush leaves office. On today's show, we're discussing the fallout of the confidence vote for India, as well as the future of the nuclear deal with America. Don't forget, we take your calls on this show. You can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Joining me from Rochester, New York, to discuss the issues at stake is Arun Gandhi, the grandson of the leader of the Indian freedom movement, Mohandas K. Gandhi, or Mahatma as he's known. Arun Gandhi serves as the president of the Gandhi Worldwide Institute. Well, here in Washington, D.C., I'm joined by Sunil Khilnani, the director of the South Asia Studies program at Johns Hopkins University and author of several books, including The Idea of India, which examines the complexity and contradictions of Indian democracy. Gentlemen, I welcome you both to the show.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Yes,
thank you, sir.
Very nice to be here.
Thanks. And Arun Gandhi, if I could start with you, sir, and ask, it seems that the opposition was coming from both sides of the spectrum, both the left wing and the right wing. Why has this nuclear deal with the USA become such a big deal for India?
Well, I think, in some ways, Iran and India are in the same boat. Both claim they want the nuclear power for peaceful purposes, and yet the world doesn't know whether it is truly peaceful or otherwise. But even if it is for peaceful purposes, I, being wedded to the philosophy of non-violence that was professed by my grandfather, I am against all nuclear energy altogether, because even if they use it for peaceful purposes, the whole question about what are they going to do with the waste and how are they going to dispose the waste has never been discussed, and future generations could be threatened by the waste, nuclear waste that we create today.
I'll touch on more of that in a moment, but let me ask you, Mr. Gandhi, how strong do you feel Prime Minister Singh's position is now that he's won that vote of confidence?
Well, I think it, in a coalition government, it's never very strong anyway, but I think he's just managed to pass one hurdle, and he has a long way to go yet.
Okay, so Neil Khilnani, good to have you with us as well. And I wonder, are you surprised at the fact it's reached this point? I mean, literally to the point of toppling the Indian government?
Well, I think what's been very interesting about this whole discussion is that we've seen for the first time a foreign policy issue really become crucial in domestic debate. Up to now, foreign policy was very much insulated from popular opinion and even from parliamentary debate. And this is the first time it's really exploded into the public domain. And I think that part of the surprise and part of the incomprehension for observers looking from outside is to try and make sense of how Indians are debating an issue which they're not familiar with. And you asked about this curious alliance which we've seen between the left and the right, the Hindu nationalist BJP and the left Communist Party. And I think that has been one of the most odd alliances really we've seen in Indian politics recently, and there have been many very strange alliances in recent years. And I think on the one hand, the left has always taken, in my view, a fairly principled position of opposition to this. They have seen this as leading to a closer tie with the US, a loss of somehow national sovereignty, etc. On the other hand, the BJP, of course, as you know, has actually been one of the parties that has been pushing close relations with the US. When the BJP were in government from in the late 90s until 2004, they were very keen. They were in many ways the people who initiated this kind of alliance. So I think their position and their opposition to this has been much more opportunistic as compared with, I think, the left.
Now, interestingly enough, it's not a done deal for Manmohan Singh yet, is it? He's won the vote of confidence, but it now still has to go through clearance with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and then clear the largest hurdle of all, which is the US Congress.
Absolutely. There's still a number of steps to go through. I think none of those steps in themselves present insurmountable obstacles. The problem is the timing. And it's really a question of whether this can be timed to get through within the current U.S. Congress and before it terminates in time for the election.
What happens if that deadline's missed?
Well, it will then be into the next session, into the next House, really, that will meet after the election. And the sense one gets is that both of the presidential candidates would, in fact, want to see this go through as well.
There's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee, absolutely. No, and there is an uncertainty over it, there's no question. But the strong sort of, substantial opposition doesn't seem to be there at the moment against it.
Well, Arun Gandhi, if I could put you an email we got from the United Kingdom here, please. This came in from Mitra Nath in the UK. The Indo-US nuclear deal is one of the best things to happen in a long time. Not only will it provide electricity for hundreds of millions of Indians, it will improve infrastructure and provide fuel. Now, I know you have your opposition to the idea of nuclear technology for a number of reasons, apart from the weapons aspect. I wonder, though, if you look at India in terms of its need for power supply in the coming years to be able to develop and progress, certainly at the pace it's going at now, what other options could you suggest?
Well, I think India, we have wonderful scientists and engineers. We ought to have been doing this a long time back, trying to find some alternate ways of finding the energy that we need, but we have neglected that, just like the rest of the world has neglected. We've just depended on what we have and what is existing instead of trying to find alternate and better and cleaner ways of producing energy there. And our scientists have been well known, and we talk a lot about our scientists who have done wonderful things in other fields. Why can't they use their energy in this field and find an alternate way of producing energy?
Well, let's get a caller on the line. We've got Dublin on the phone, and Sharma has a question. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question is, in case if nuclear deal, if US gives a go ahead with the nuclear deal, will India will be influenced by US in almost most of the foreign policies? For example, there is likely some agreement need to be done between India and Iran. If something happens to Iran, will you...
Sharma, let me get Arun Gandhi's perspective on that first, then I'll put it to Sunil. But, sir, do you think that that any kind of closer tie-up with the US, as is being suggested through this nuclear deal, would have a bearing on other aspects of Indian foreign policy?
I think it's bound to happen because, the United States is depending a lot on this nuclear deal for their economic resurgence. There are so many American companies just waiting to go into India and start building and producing and investing there. So there is going to be a lot more attached, economic connections between the two countries, and so other political influences also will come into play.
Now, Sunil, of course, what the critics are saying is that this is a backdoor for the US to look at India's overall nuclear policies, that this even, India is not part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and this gives the US a backdoor into being able to examine what's happening by having the option to go into examine the nuclear energy facilities and so on. Now, again, do you think it could have impact on other aspects of foreign policy?
Well, I mean, on that larger question, I don't really see how it's going to massively change the kind of foreign policy that India has been trying to develop over the last few decades, really. And I think that it's right that one has to see the nuclear deal in the context of a larger panorama of India trying to reposition itself in the world. And I think that, what this has done, as you rightly say, India is not part of the NPT, whereas Iran was, and that's an important difference in the two countries' programs. But this is a way of bringing India into the global nuclear community. in a way that is actually on pretty good terms for India. I think that the critics of this deal in India have really missed that point. That, you know, at some point India does have to enter, has to be recognized as being effectively a nuclear power.
What about the other angle, the aspect, does India need the nuclear power for supplying its growth?
Yeah. Well, there I would share some of the skepticism that Arun Gandhi was raising in this sense, that I don't think nuclear power is really going to be the primary way of addressing India's nuclear needs. I think that there are other sources of sustainable energy that India has done some research on, but has not in recent years been developing, where really it'll have to focus much more. I mean, at the moment, nuclear power is a very small fraction of India's power needs, and it's going to have to grow at a very fast rate if it's really going to become significant. And I don't quite see that happening in the next 10 to 15, 20 years.
Let me put a question to you, Sunil, that came in by email from Qatar, in Doha in Qatar. And Shadab Ahmed Khan says, India has never succumbed to pressure from any of the so-called superpowers. Why would this deal make it any different? In case the US pressures India on issues, we always have alternatives like Russia and China. They're always on their toes to assist India. Now, I wonder to what extent those old alliances that India had, Russia being, of course, you know, the most obvious one here, remain intact in light of the US, you know, the closer relationship with the US that India has.
Well, I mean, I agree with your correspondent when he says that he's not so worried about India being lent on by the US. I mean, I think that is right. On the other hand, I don't think India is in a position, or indeed the world's order is in such a position where old alliances still count for that much. It's an incredibly fluid situation internationally. Countries are making alliances with one another, at the same time looking over their shoulders, making alliances with the enemies of their allies and so forth. It's a very sort of, every country is hedging its bets today in the international system. And in that situation, I think India has to, in a sense, be very canny. It has to take all the opportunities it can get and not rely on old alliances.
Right. Well, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to just stand with us for a few moments. We're going to take a very short break. More on the future of India's Indo-US nuclear deal when we return.